Okay. Today's class, a couple of introductory observations. Today's class, as you know, will be shortened some because the second part is going to be every year we have a discussion, people nominate, in this case, 27 history books for the History Book Club, which runs year round. It will go from April to December. And so you members of the History Book Club will have a chance to describe the books you selected or suggested. And of course, anybody else who's interested should stay tuned also. It's quite fascinating to hear new and unusual book titles. Anything related to history is valid. So we're going to do that in the second part of today. Also, I wanted to, because this is the last class, I just wanted to mention to all of you that I've really liked spending time with you this winter. It's been as an amazing group, as you know. You folks are interested and curious about history, ideas, the life of the mind. In short, all of you are lifelong learners. And it's really been a privilege for me to spend time with you. I really appreciate our gathering. A couple of specific people. Walt Havens has been very helpful behind the scenes. And also, we have a new wizard of technology who's been central to the program, and that is my wife, Diana Hottell.
Hello, hello.
Yes, and even though you're silenced, I can hear loud applause and
loud laughter. I
know. Also, can you turn this down a little bit?
Well, why don't you stand up?
Well, okay.
Oh, there we go.
You can go back.
The technologist is getting picture here.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, I just wanted to be sure that you saw the shamrock. Today, as many of us remember, today is the eve. This is the eve of St. Patrick's Day. Let's see if there's nothing else. Welcome, Walt, and Margaret, Eric. So a quick review. So we will be stopping a little early, be discussing the new books. It's always fascinating to hear what nominations you come up with. So a quick review of last week. What did we visit last week? It was the extraordinary pioneer movement of the German peoples. A pioneer movement, colonization beyond the Elbe River to the Oder Neisse. And that great colonization movement was made possible because of the sudden increase in population of the German people. And of course, how could you explain that amazing increase in the population of the Germans? Several reasons. We saw the nutrition level of Europeans increased notably thanks to the introduction of legumes, beans, peas, broad beans, all introduced by the Arabs in their conquest across North Africa and their occupation of Sicily and Spain. So the population increased, and then three inventions also made it possible for the Northern Europeans to plow that rich soil and cut through the deep roots. Because it rained so much in Northern Europe, the scratch plow from the Mediterranean was useless. So the invention of the the moldboard plow changed history profoundly. And also the invention of the horse collar and nailed horseshoes. Okay, today we're going to Eastern Europe. For the most part, we've focused on Germany so far. And the name of the course is Germany, Central and Eastern Europe. So today, focusing on Eastern Europe. Let's start with a map of Eastern Europe today. It's a little less familiar than Western Europe. Thank you for enlarging. So this quite a mass of countries constitute Eastern Europe, starting, and by the way, the right-hand slice with the white arrow, we're going to start up in Estonia. We have Estonia in the far north, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, those three, plus the next three, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. All six of those countries were republics in the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So all six of those countries were separate, were like states of a union, states in the Soviet Union until 1989 when the Soviet Empire collapsed. The countries of the free world, of course, the Iron Curtain came running down this line right here. But we have Poland, the Czech Republic today, Slovakia, that split up. The Czechoslovakia split into two. Then we have Hungary here, Serbia, Bosnia, the site of that horrible Bosnian War from 1992 to 94, Slovenia and Croatia, and of course Romania and Bulgaria. They were also communist countries, as well as Serbia. Anyway, so that's to get oriented to the Eastern Europe today. Now we're going to focus on Eastern Europe in the 14th century. This next map shows Eastern Europe in the 14th century. So we're going back 600 years. And some remarkable change happened in the 14th century. Namely, the 14th century saw an important shift in the center of gravity in Europe to the east, right to these countries. 14th century saw an important shift. The center of gravity shifted in Europe to the east. So first question is what happened, what was going on in Western Europe at this time? And this map the next map will show us that the major countries of Western Europe, France and England, were locked together in an endless war, the 100 Years' War, which weakened both countries. The 100 Years' War, if your math is good, lasted 114 years.
From what to what?
From what it was from 1337 to 1453, more than a century. And there's a drain on the economies, so England and France were ground down. Same with Germany. The great empire of Otto I, the Holy Roman Empire, mostly the German people, did last about 300 years. But then it disintegrated pretty rapidly when the last emperor, king and emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick II, he lost interest in his German possessions, and he loved it down in the sunshine. And so he moved his capital down to southern Italy, Apulia, and to Sicily. That's where he, oops, yes. So this area is where the Holy Roman Emperor spent 3/4 of his long reign. And what did that effect have on Germany? It meant that all through the Middle Ages, there was a power struggle. It was built in to the monarchies. If the king or emperor was strong enough, he was able to hold a central government, a kingdom or monarchy. But if you had a king or emperor who was weaker or incompetent, the power, that left a power vacuum. And who filled it? All the great landowning nobles. They automatically acquired more power and authority to themselves. Now this next map shows exactly what happened. Look at this is Germany. The map is identified as Germany in about 1500. Actually, it begins about 1250. So this is what Germany looked like from the 1250 on for centuries. It was fragmented. There was no strong central government after Otto the Great's 300-year Holy Roman Empire. So instead, if you read the names of some of these tiny states, independent states, they include duchies, that is dukedoms. So there were dukes, barons, earls, principalities, that is princes, archbishops, archbishoprics, countdoms, ruled by counts. The best translation is counties. So Germany, this was a disaster in terms of Germans' political progress. It was fragmented while the countries, many of the other countries of Europe were becoming more and more unified under a single monarchy. So now let's take a look at, there's another disaster. Several disasters happened. This is the Black Death. The bubonic plague struck from 1347 to 1351. So for 4 or 5 years, this is an excellent map to show what happened. The dark colored, like Marseille in France, and the islands, Sicily and the Sicily and Corsica. These islands were the first islands where ships came from Constantinople. It's right here in the far east here. Constantinople is where the Black Death plague started in Europe, coming from Central Asia, came across the Silk Road. It was the black flea living on, it was the flea living on black rats who were always passengers on ships. They were opportunists. And so when the ships, the Venetian galleys, particularly from Genoa, sailed from Constantinople across to the islands, Sicily, Sardinia, and then to France, Marseille, the south of France, the black rats with their fleas got off the ships and started this hideous pandemic, the bubonic plague, where people died, were bitten by the flea, who died within about 3 or 4 days. And you can see the first year, and the second year was this pinkish color. Then Frankfurt, that was the 3rd year. And then the 4th year was the paler. And by the way, this was important because Poland and Lithuania were managed to avoid the Black Death for the most part. They were spared. So this is another disaster for Western Europe, and another reason why power shifted toward the east. Now, at the same time, the Western Europe was suffering and declining in many ways. The population dropped, it plummeted. It was horrifying. Now we're going to take a look at the Eastern, back in Eastern Europe. This is in the 14th century. Several formerly unnoticed states are becoming very powerful, taking precedence over Western Europe. So let's let's look at Bohemia. It's right here. It's in the far left. Okay, if you can read the fine print, it says the Kingdom of Bohemia. So run around this one. So Bohemia. Oh, good. Thank you for magnifying. That became an important, powerful state. Bohemia, for the most part, today it would be in Czechoslovakia. Well, not Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic. Bohemia is a majority. The Bohemian people occupy the majority of the Czech Republic of today. Okay, take a look at Poland here. It was an enormously large state of Slavic peoples. By the way, Bohemia and the city of Prague is the central city there. That was led by a great king, Charles the Great. Poland here, under the leadership of King Casimir the Great, then dropped down to Hungary, an enormous kingdom, under the leadership of Louis the Great, or Louis the Great. Then over to Lithuania, was an enormous state, right to just east of Poland. And then go down to the south, so the Kingdom of Serbia, well, it's off the map, but go to Bosnia here. Serbia. Oh, okay, good. We've enlarged the map. This whole southern large area of the Balkans, that's the Serbian Empire. Well, it was the Kingdom of Serbia. And finally, Austria, which is, take a look at, can you enlarge that again? On the left here, Austria is just a pretty small fry on this map of Eastern Europe, but Austria is just beginning to rise to an extraordinarily powerful kingdom under the Habsburg Dynasty. The Habsburgs, the first, Rudolph I was the first Habsburg. Actually, it came from Switzerland. And his dynasty lasted hundreds of years. So Austria became one of the great powers of Central and Eastern Europe. Also, there was a cultural integration of much of this whole area. It's extraordinary. Just to give one indicator, great universities were first established in Prague. If you go to Prague over here, University of Prague established in 1348, and several others about the same time in Poland, Krakow in Poland. I don't think it's on the map here. Anyway, the University of Krakow was established. The University of Vienna over here, that's the word Vienna. And finally, the University of Pest. Now, Pest is not a household name, but it's in the Serbian kingdom. It's down in the southern part. It's in present-day Kosovo. So these are four great universities which were established about the same time. What does that tell us? It tells us there was a huge, and these are widespread all over Eastern Europe. That tells us that there was a huge advance in the intellectual life of the region. a huge intellectual advance in the intellectual life of Eastern Europe. Just there are thousands of examples, but just one example in Prague, in Bohemia. That's no, in Poland, southern Poland at that time. Nicholas Copernicus did his studies of astronomy. Astronomy is just one of the sciences that really became advanced. So Nicholas Copernicus in Krakow, Poland. By the way, there is a Nicholas Copernicus High School there. You know somebody who graduated from that. Copernicus changed the history of science, the history of astronomy, profoundly. He's the one who first posited, and he didn't dare publish it until his deathbed, his new hypothesis that the Earth was not the center of the solar system, but the sun was instead. And of course, that was an outrage to all the academic world at the time. He could have been put to death, burned at the stake for that sort of a heresy. Anyway, it just shows the intellectual life of Eastern Europe was very thriving. Okay, now questions. Go back, take a look at Bohemia again. How did Bohemia become a powerful state? Well, several reasons. The financial strength of Bohemia owed a lot to its opening of the silver mines down in Kutna Hora. And secondly, the arrow is right on Prague here. Prague enjoyed a strategic position in the trade routes, which were just expanding and coming to life. Okay, next picture will show the city of Prague.
I thought you wanted to go back to here, but we'll go forward.
Here's the city of Prague today, and the Vltava River. By the way, this bridge is called Charles, if you've been to Prague, you're familiar with this. The bridge at the very center of the city is called the Charles IV Bridge. And he was the great king who most expanded the power and authority of the Bohemian people. Now this city, it was pretty badly damaged. No. This is one of the cities during World War II that was not bombed to bits by the British, Americans, Canadians. And look, it's just the most beautiful medieval town. And this town became the great medieval center in the 14th century. And it's like visiting, going back 600 years. Look at the beautiful spires on these two skyscraping buildings. One, just a sidebar, you can't see this house, but look at this pier in the bridge, the Charles Bridge. Behind it, there is a beautiful home right on the Vltava River. And this shows how cultured the Bohemian people are. That house, for a very long time, has been reserved for the most important artist in the country. And turn of the century, the person who lived there, shared that honor, was Anton Dvorak, the great Czech composer. Dvorak lived there. That was, it just shows how much prestige was given to the arts and the cultural life in Eastern Europe. So, okay, let's go to the map again.
Which map?
what's the next one? Poland.
I have the map of the Baltic Sea.
Oops, no.
Or I can go back to this one.
Yeah, yeah. Now this map shows, well, you can't see the rivers, but the dark blue country there is the Czech Republic. And one of the things that made Prague such a powerful city was the trade routes. The trade routes in Eastern Europe went along the Vltava River. That meant that Prague had a strategic location and became wealthy off international trade, shipping and trade and commerce. Okay, next question. How did Poland become a powerful state? What's the best map for this? Let's go back to the 14th century map.
All right.
How did Poland become a powerful state? Poland, of course, in our minds, being a Slavic population, they were looked down on the Germans as being less civilized. So, but below the surface, there was a real grit. And we learned that with the great Slavic revolt against the Germans' colonization movement. And that stopped dead in the tracks the German pioneer movement toward the east for many years. But now Poland is going to become quite wealthy because, in part, because of the Baltic Sea port towns. Now this map is a good map showing the Baltic Sea. Yeah, thanks for enlarging it. So the Baltic Sea going all the way from Germany over in the far left, even Denmark. Along Germany, let's go slowly across Poland, to Lithuania, even up to Estonia and Latvia. You remember the Germans established port cities there, and when the sea trade expanded greatly. So in Poland, Poland had some rich natural resources that could not be exploited early. There was a lot of timber, marketable trees, lumber trees, timber in all through central Poland, and also grain. Poland had some of the most fertile soil in places in Eastern Europe. And so Poland could produce a lot of grain, but they could not get it to any customers. They couldn't market it for a long time. When you're hauling grain or lumber on an ox cart, when you cart bulk cargo like that, you can't get very far. So it was useless. But when these seaports, thanks to the Germans, with all these seaports along, say, the coast of Poland.
Is this the only coast of Poland?
The coast of Poland ran all the way from here in the east, all the way over to here, to the Oder-Neisse River. So that was part of Poland. So with all these seaports and, equally important, river ports, we're going to follow the Vistula River that goes from Danzig in the north, start up on the Baltic Sea. It runs right down the center of Poland. That's the Vistula River. And it had four major tributaries. That meant that anybody growing grain or milling lumber in the whole central part of Poland could now get it to a river port, get it on a ship, send it downriver to the Baltic Sea at the port of Danzig. Danzig was probably the most important seaport for Poland. Today, the name has been changed to Gdansk. So Polish lumber, grain, and other products could be shipped from almost anywhere in central Poland down to the Baltic, and then they could be shipped toward the west over to the German ports of Lübeck and several others, Stralsund, and to the east to Prussia, to Lithuania, Latvia, and even up into Finland. And well, let's get familiar with the Gulf of Bothnia, which is up here, it goes with almost the whole length of Finland. This is the Gulf of Bothnia. And then also the Gulf of Finland over here, that runs all the way to Russia, to the port of St. Petersburg today, Leningrad on this map. So all of these ports in the Baltic were now available to Polish cargo ships. So Poland became quite wealthy as soon as these ports opened up, and they finally could export their important trade goods, timber, lumber, and grain.
Plus, they didn't get hit by the bubonic plague, right?
Yeah, and besides, thank you, Diane. Also, Poland was not decimated by the bubonic plague, the Black Death, the way that all of Western Europe was. So Poland is a flourishing, important, large, and powerful state in Eastern Europe. Just before we leave Poland, I want to take a look at that harbor city of Gdansk right here. The seaport city of Gdansk.
Lost my.
Okay, it's right here. It's on the Baltic Sea there. That has been in the modern century, the 20th century, that was the main ship, the biggest shipyards by far in Poland. Yes, Gdansk today. That, by the way, is where the Solidarity movement was started by Lech Wałęsa. When the Soviet Empire collapsed, Poland and all these Eastern European countries all of a sudden became freed. And as I recall, the first great large-scale rebellion against the Soviets was in Gdansk, led by Lech Wałęsa, and it was a Solidarity movement. We're going to look at a Polish man.
Okay.
Now this is a portrait of a Polish, not gentleman, he was a laborer, but he's in his uniform, and this is taken at the time when Poland became independent of the Soviet Union. So it's a very interesting portrait because this man belonged to a labor union, probably in Gdansk, the shipyard, but he was very proud of his labor union, also proud of his church, the Polish Catholic Church, was a symbol of their independent spirit. Proud of his profession. He was a coal miner, labor, and he belonged to the labor union, the Solidarity movement. And he's wearing, right at his collar, you see the hammer and the sickle and hammer of the symbol of communism, international communism. But look down at this badge at the very bottom. That is in Polish, beautiful graphics. That, translated from Polish, is solidarity, the Solidarity movement. Also, pinned above that, you see a portrait of Pope John Paul II, the first ever Pope from Poland. So Poland had a tremendously strong and proud sense of nationalism. Of course, the country became free in 1989. Okay, now we're going to take a look at Lithuania. Here's this Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, and you remember what a huge state this was in the 14th century. just two pictures to show in the capital, Vilnius, the beautiful architecture. And the city really came alive in the 14th century. And here we have a public building in the distance, two churches in the foreground, and just beautiful. Look at these Russian type domes on this church and the belfry right here. And the church next to it is Gothic, built way back in the Gothic period before the Renaissance. So this whole city came alive before the Renaissance. The most beautiful city of medieval architecture. Now, Regina Lebanosis, who is here with us, she went to Vilnius to visit because that's where her family had been for, I suppose, centuries. She was able to visit the homeland of her Lithuanian, I think on both sides of her, yeah, on both sides of the family, I think, were Lithuanians. And the next picture, just a detail of this cathedral on the left. This is, every detail here is Gothic. The pointed arches, the stained glass windows. Okay, now getting back to the map. Well, there was a major moment in 1386 when the powerful kingdom of Poland united with the powerful, even larger kingdom of Lithuania. There was a marriage between the Queen of Poland, Jadwiga, and the King of Lithuania, Vladislav II. So the two powerful states became even, and even before this, Lithuania was the largest, by far, the largest state in all of Europe. And a quick glance down at the Kingdom of Serbia. You remember that's where one of the great universities of Pest was located. And Pest, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but Pest was a beautiful medieval city from the 14th century on until, well, Diana and I drove our Volkswagen camper through through Serbia, former Yugoslavia, to the town of Pest, which was still a thriving city. But today, if you visit Pest, it's rubble. It's been totally destroyed. It's a great medieval city. Why? Because of the Bosnian War. The Bosnian War started in 1992, lasted for 4 years. It was the president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic. He ordered the tanks and artillery of Serbia right into Pest, right into the center of the city, this beautiful city. And they opened fire and just destroyed not only the whole center, the ancient heart of this beautiful medieval city, one of the first great university cities in Eastern Europe, and leveled the city to rubble. I've been following it in the news, but here it was for 600 years, a wonderful medieval city demolished. And Slobodan Milosevic, of course, was a nationalist, gaining power by hatred of the other neighboring Balkan, Yugoslavian republics. But finally, that exploded in his face when he shelled the historic city of Dubrovnik. World opinion turned against him, and he finally was put on trial. He and some of his colleagues were put on trial at the International Court of Justice. Okay, now we're going to finish up with, we're going to keep this map, finish up with Ukraine very briefly. We have to be brief. Ukraine has had a long, totally a different category from all these other countries in Eastern Europe. Ukraine has had a long history of being occupied, conquered and occupied by foreign powers. This goes back to 1,000 years. Now, Ukraine looks huge on this map, but this is when it was a republic, part of the Soviet Union. It was just one state of the Soviet Union. But just, I'm going to speed through 1,000 years of Ukrainian history. For centuries, of course, it was first created by the Swedish Vikings, who organized the Slavs here, and they became rulers over the Slavic who did the labor for the first Russian Empire. Then the Mongols, Genghis Khan and the Mongol hordes swept across Central Asia, and when let's go back to that last map. It shows the Golden Horde. Yeah, take a look at this. Put the white arrow on. Thank you. This is called the Khanate of the Golden Horde. In the early Middle Age, in the Middle Ages, when Genghis Khan died, his son Ogadai was an equally brilliant commander of the cavalry, the whole Mongolian nation on horseback. They conquered, occupied Ukraine, and many of them settled down there in the area, especially the eastern part of the Crimea, which is this area right here. And they became known as the Tatars, the descendants from the Mongols. Then, when their power ran out, Poland and Lithuania occupied and dominated the Ukrainian people for centuries. But by 1790s, the Austro-Hungarian Empire had settled down and occupied the western half of the Ukrainian population, and the Russians grabbed the eastern part, this part over here, all the way down. Now that's a moment in history which you will be very familiar with to you, because ever since then, the eastern part has been dominated by Russian influence, the religion, Russian Orthodox, the language, Russian, predominant language, Russian, and the western part, all of this was occupied, much of it by the Austro-Hungarians, and their religion was Catholic, Western, and their language was Ukrainian. They kept their language. Then the Tsars of Russia conquered, occupied for about a century. So here, all these different foreign powers occupied Ukraine until World War I. Finally, the Russian Empire collapsed at the end of World War I. So for a short period of 5 years, Ukrainian people were independent until the Bolsheviks, the communists, Lenin, actually it was Leon Trotsky, who brilliantly organized the Red Army, occupied Ukraine. So that was 5 years of, ended 5 years of independence. And finally, we're going to skip Stalin's brutal destruction of the Ukrainian people. 7 million Ukrainians had died during the famine of 1932 and 33. as well as Stalin's goons going door to door, grabbing all the food from the Ukrainian people. Finally, when the Soviet Empire collapsed in 1991, the Ukrainians finally became independent for the last 30 years. And of course, we're watching hour by hour what's happening in Ukraine today. Okay, that was a quick, the story of Ukrainian history is so fascinating that we don't have time to spend any more time on it. Okay, so that wraps up the history class for today. And we don't have time for questions and observations because we're going to start right now onto our discussion of the books. And Walt is the one taking tabulations. Anyway, a final thank you for joining in this history class. It was a real privilege for me, and I just really enjoyed spending time with you lifelong learners. So we're going to go to Walt and myself. Let me get my list. Okay, let's go to Walt's. Can we enlarge Walt?
Oh, no. Okay, Walt, go.
Okay, Walt, do you want to kind of describe what we're doing? And
okay, okay, I will do that. So I think everybody who is interested in the book club has gotten a copy of a spreadsheet that includes, what did you say, 27 titles?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I've got that up on my other screen now. I don't know if you, Bill, can you display it on your screen so we see it instead of you?
Walt, I didn't practice that, and I don't think I can find it because I have to go to the email.
Yeah, it would take a long time.
So
can I try to do it? I have it. This
okay.
is Ariel. But Diana, you have to go to the share screen button below, and then like there's a little arrow next to it, and then enable participant sharing or something like that.
Right.
You got it?
One participant can share.
So go to share screen down below the green arrow. Right there, there's a smaller arrow next to it, and then it'll say something like allow more than one participant to share.
Multiple go ahead.
Yeah, yes,
right.
We've got
Should
that.
be able to do it.
That, and then Walt, try to share your screen if you have it. Probably be easier for you to go along with it than me.
Okay.
So go to the green button that says share screen and try to like I can do it, but
Ariana, do you have access to it?
There
you go.
Yeah, I've got it pulled up, but I'm not sure that I can follow along. I mean, or even stay long enough, but I'll try my best. Okay. I'll just
I can talk our way through this, and then you just need to scroll up occasionally.
Okay. All right, I'll do that.
So what I'd propose that we do is each person who is the nominator, you see the nominator column there. So Kathy Ehrenberg is the nominator of the first book. We'd have each person maybe spend no more than about 30 seconds describing the book, because otherwise it'll take a really long time to get through all 27 titles. And so if we could just kind of walk through the list, then when we're done, that's all we need to do right now. People could ask questions if they want, just like we do normally when we're together and are proposing book titles. And then when we're all finished with that, each person who wants to can vote. And I'd suggest that we do that by sending an email with your votes in it to me or to Bill or to both of us. And we want you to vote for 5 books. And we want you to list them in your priority order. So choice 1 through choice 5, because we're going to assign more points for choice 1 than for the others. So it's going to be a 10, 7, 5, 3, 2 votes. And
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Walt.
Okay, I had just seen a note from Glenda and Dale, and I'm not sure why if they're not seeing the screen. Is everyone seeing the list of books on Bill's screen?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Most of you are, yes.
And Ariana is running it, I'm assuming.
Right.
No one sharing the screen because I had it already pulled up. So I'll just carry
Good.
along.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so Kathy, do you want to talk about the first 3 books?
Is
Kathy, are you still with us?
unmute yourself, Kathy, if you're still here. And
Well, okay. Let me
I'm
go.
sorry. You know,
Oh,
inscriptions are here next to the books. And there's also a column to the right on the spreadsheet. You can mark that column to the right, 1 to 5 in priority, and turn it in to Walt, and he could compile it, which simplifies, I think, the process considerably.
okay, Kathy, go ahead. By the way, the first book on there, High Desert, we voted on that one last year, but it's impossible to get copies of that book. So it
Bill, I did a little research last night after we talked about this, and the book is readily available, but it is about $20. So
that's running.
At Amazon, there seem to be lots of copies available, but most of them are in the price of $20 to $21.
Okay.
So that may be a little more than you want people to have to pay for books. It's just something to know.
Okay.
In making the
used copies from $3 to $6.
okay, let's Kathy.
I didn't know the book had gotten that expensive. I gave it as Christmas presents in 2020, and it was a lot less than that. But that's a good point. If it's hard to get, Waterston is a longtime ranching resident of Oregon, an excellent naturalist and a good social historian, and she takes a look at the profoundly different ways social and moral capital are defined in Oregon, particularly in Eastern Oregon. It's a small book. It's a beautiful book. The second, the British Museums, Dan Hicks' book has had an amazing impact on museums around the world, as some of the largest museums are now sending back their benign, Bill, help me here, bronzes. But the book is he goes into the detail of the colonial violence and the cultural rape that took place in Africa. It's still a very important book in terms of restitution issues, and he's a lively and good writer. It won a lot of history awards. And then Horowitz's book on Katrina, the flood in New Orleans, is one of the best books out there, I think, on the flood, and it's a fascinating history of New Orleans. And there are so many things about the Corps of Engineers that I didn't know. And also he goes in to what boycotts of Cuba meant how that destroyed the New Orleans port, and what the connection there is, which is just fascinating. So not particularly timely books, but well worth reading.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
So Christy Stebbins?
Christy?
Unmuting myself. You know, I have completely forgotten about this book and this is a holdover, I think, from the last go round. I don't really know much about it. I feel like my life has moved on from this issue. It sounds like an interesting read. I think it got good reviews. I'm sorry, I can't give you more information than what we've got in that little piece. And I confess I have not had a time to look at this list and digest it much at all. Sadly, there were about 5 other books that I wanted to recommend, but I didn't have the time to review them. And those were all recommended by Fiona Hill in interviews that she's given recently, but I haven't added them to this list, so I won't bring them up now, other than say, alas, I failed. So I'm sorry that's not an overwhelming endorsement of that book. I think it sounds like an interesting topic, but I have to say personally that there are many other books on this list that interest me more. So that's not an overwhelming endorsement, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I should have said in the introductory remarks that the first 5 books on the list were carryovers that we really liked last year in our discussion and our voting, but they were not available, and so we kind of kept them, and we kind of kept them for this year, and that's why the Code Breaker is on the list. And if you're interested in how this whole business of gene editing and CRISPR works, I think it's a book for you, because it is timely. You hear about gene editing and CRISPR very frequently in scientific circles these days.
Right.
Okay, Bill, The Sum of Us.
The Sum of Us is a carryover from last year when we were doing Black history. And The Sum of Us is a good summary of the abuse that Black people have suffered in the United States. There's several really good books, and this is one of them. So that's all I will say about that. I have more books coming up on the list.
Okay, Bill Moody. Bill, are you here today?
I know he was here. Unmute yourself, Bill.
Okay, do you have me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Go.
Okay.
You good?
Yeah, the book, as you see, there is Hero of the Empire. It's the early days of Winston Churchill. In his early days, he felt his destiny was to become the prime minister. In order to get the notoriety, he felt he had to have some military campaign and do some heroics to really become a headliner. And so he went to South Africa, and there he embarked on a writing career and got engaged in the Boer War. And very early in that, he was taken prisoner. Then a lot of the book focuses on his daring escape, which is, pretty exciting, and goes through all these different steps before he finally frees himself. And anyway, it's good if you're interested in Churchill. It's a very, very good book. The author, Candace Millard, also wrote River of Doubt. She's got another one coming out, The River of the Gods, just coming out on the Nile. So anyway, that's I found it very exciting, and just a little more insights into Winston Churchill.
Right, good. So we've got a couple of Timothy Egan books again this year, and Bill has the first nomination, The Good Rain.
Okay, that book, as far as I know, was his first book. I may be mistaken, but if not, as one of his early books. And many of you have read Egan books, and I think he had very, very high reviews. His way he can integrate, history, culture, geography, And he certainly does that in this, which really focuses on the Pacific Northwest, primarily in the state of Washington, talking about geology and geography, weather and climate, and a lot of history, particularly a lot of it related to the indigenous people. He focuses a lot on the Columbia River, both at the area of Astoria, and later on just talking about the Great Columbia River system. Talks about a lot of the injustices done to the indigenous, and a lot of the politics, early history, and things. Some of those same things are carry over to today. But Olympic Mountains, the early settlement of Seattle, a lot of the War of the Woods, which focus, two of these chapters focus on, one in Crater Lake, one down on the vast forests of the Siskiyou and Umpqua National Forest, and hits salmon and Yakima Valley. So it's a geography lesson, a history of the Pacific Northwest, and I think he does a masterful job.
Okay, thank you. So, a woman of no importance. Judith, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What I've written there is pretty much the little from the jacket from the back, but I think reading it was more of almost a thriller in today's world, because you follow her along through the whole beginnings of the early French resistance and how it really didn't come to fore without her help. They were just little pockets that were trying, and they weren't organized. It also was nominated as one of the books for women's history this year. I noticed that was on the list. It's an easy read. It gives you a lot of insight into German history during that time, as well as de Gaulle and the French resistance. And I just thought it was a very readable book with a lot of history connected to our German class of today.
All right, a good point. Connecting to our German class. All right, David.
Oh yeah, Facing the Mountain. Yeah, that's as pretty much I say in this the book. It's gives you the backstory of the men and women and living in Hawaii and the continental U.S. This is the same author that wrote Boys in the Boat, and it's the similar style he uses here. You know, following several people and their families throughout the book and what happens to them and where they end up later. And it gives a pretty good picture of what it was like in the internment camps and eventually how the Nisei came to be formed and their incredible importance in World War II. They were the most decorated regiment in the war, 44th 2nd Regimental Combat Team. And like Senator Inoue of Hawaii was a member of that. You know, that's where he lost his arm, I think. Mm-hmm. So anyway, it's very readable, even though it is 482 pages, but it's a quick read.
Okay, thank you. The next two are mine. The first one is The Revenge of Geography. If you can see me in your little tiny box in the corner, you can see I'm holding up the book. Geography really fascinates me. We just heard in today's class how the Vistula River and its influence on the growth of the Lithuanian and Polish economies and cultures. And it's that way around the world, how geography affects things. And this particular book, I haven't read it, but in looking at the jacket, it looks like the author has looked at places of conflict and looked at the geography of those and how geography plays with that, and then is trying to play forward where future conflicts are likely to occur based on their geography. And so I think that could be an interesting study. The second book, The Dawn of Everything, I really put it in more as a placeholder for next year because I think this is a book that's only available as a hardcover and would be too expensive to have this year. But it looks like a really great new history of the whole human race, looking at it in a new way. And so I think we should consider that for next year. So rather than for this year, but I got it on the list now. Okay, Val, are you there?
I am here. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes. Hear you loud and clear.
I recommend the Black Sea, and it is as pertinent as anything could possibly be. Great deal of attention to Ukraine, but it just studies the cultures that have come into conflict over the centuries, but a lot of it is current, and he is a brilliant writer. It's a dense book, but it's not a difficult to follow book. It's just packed with so much stuff because we've got the countries surrounding the Black Sea, and we have the Ottoman Turks, we have the whole Russia thing. The Ukraine is highly emphasized. I would say probably a third of the book on Ukraine. And all the cultures around the Black Sea. And again, just as Walt was just referring to the geography, these huge streams of culture that have come in to meet. It's east versus west. And he has a lot of interesting cultural things. And I just can't recommend it enough as being about as current a book as you could find and still go back and give you the background of it.
Okay.
Okay, so now we go to Mr. Bill Hottell.
The first book here, A Perfect Red. It's, in a way, it's a history of the color red, but it is fascinating. It's fascinating. In Europe, all through the Middle Ages, for artists and clothing designers, all through the Middle Ages, and through the Renaissance, the color red was very important to artists, especially because if you remember one of the great Renaissance paintings, red was a color that the Virgin Mary is assigned by the artist to highlight her importance, or the central figures are almost always painted in red. Then, as soon as Cortez conquered Mexico, the conquistadores noticed that the Aztecs had an incredibly bright color red that they used in their writings and drawings and their clothes styles that had never been seen before. And what it is, it's a small insect, a small bug called the cochineal. The cochineal, it lives only on the nopal cactuses of southern Mexico and Central America principally. And you crush the body of the cochineal bug, and it produces this brilliant red that the Europeans had never seen before. So it was so valuable that international wars between Britain, France, and Spain were held to control the bug, the cochineal bug. On to my next suggestion is a book by Timothy Egan. Mm-hmm. It's his most recent book, A Pilgrimage to Eternity. Mm-hmm. And what it is, it's about 3 different themes all at once. He walks mostly a pilgrimage from Canterbury in England to Rome, and goes through all across France, Switzerland, Northern Italy. So it's like a history we know what a fascinating writer Timothy Egan is. He includes the history of all of these towns and villages and areas that he goes through. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time, it's a spiritual journey. It's a probe into his inner life, which is fascinating. So it's 2 or 3 different themes. Absolutely fascinating, and just his spiritual inner work. He's struggling with his faith with the Catholic Church. Okay, that's on to the next. I have suggested several in a row here. The next book, The Saga of Chief Joseph. Now, this book originally was written in 1941, but from a viewpoint of white American archives, sources, and writers. But very recently, Nez Perce Indians and other tribes have contributed a totally different viewpoint of the life of Chief Joseph. So this book, and if we vote for it, we have to order the 2017 edition, which includes the Native American Indian contributions to the life of Chief Joseph. Next book, Sweetness and Power. It's a Penguin book, and it is considered, I haven't read it, but the reviews describe it as the most complete history of sugar that exists. And sugar, of course, as we remember from last year's history class, sugar its history includes human slavery, because the American South would not have thrived, would not have become an important part of the country if it hadn't been for the plantations, 400 years of plantation. And sugar plantation was the most profitable. The next book, The Guns of August, which we're all familiar with, written by Barbara Tuchman. It is simply the best account of those weeks that led up to World War I. August of 1914, when World War I exploded. And the causes are fascinating. Just a series of alliances between rival countries in Europe. And if you step back and look at it, it makes no sense that nobody really wanted World War I to start, but people were locked in, trapped in by this series of alliances. President Kennedy kept cases of this book and gave out The Guns of August to visitors to the White House. Final book, and it's well written. By the way, Eric Larson says in one of his reviews, he says the first paragraph of The Guns of August is simply the most beautiful and interesting leads of any nonfiction book in history. The final book suggesting is The Unworthy Republic, which I have not read, but reviews say it's a very good account of the American treatment of Native Americans, the whites' treatment of Native Americans as we crossed the country from east to west. I won't say any more about that. Okay, next.
Yeah, I guess that's me then.
Yes.
The book I'm recommending is Empire Land by Satnam Sangera, relatively recently published last fall. Sangera is a British journalist of Punjabi descent. And the book is about how Britain's fascination with its own empire past allows it to look past the obvious and not so obvious bits of racism that are intertwined with its imperial past. And because of that, Britain is unable to, this day, deal well with its racist roots. It was a very, very readable. It's not that long a book. It's extensively footnoted, but the footnotes do not get in the way of the reading. I thought it was very timely, especially coming on the heels of last year's Black History lectures by Bill. I would show you a copy of the book, but Bill has my copy. Incidentally, the book is, I just checked, the book is available on Amazon, both soft and hardcover. It's not available in Kindle. And I was also in a bookshop today here in Britain, and I can get it pretty cheap, probably cheaper than even on Amazon. I don't know that I could get 30 or 40 copies of it back through customs, but I could probably bring a few. That's all I'll say.
Okay, Bill, are you going to speak for Kent and Allison, or are they here?
Yeah, I don't think they're here. Kent Woodruff and Allison suggested this book strongly during our history class last winter, actually a couple of years ago. But what it is, it's we were studying the mountain men, the fur trappers of the American West. That is the first American pioneers, though they were before the pioneers, who went into the Rocky Mountains, explored, just as a byproduct, explored the entire Rocky Mountain area, going far south as New Mexico. Some of the fur trappers kept diaries, kept journals, a few. But this one by Osborne Russell, he had a long, it's amazing that he's survived, but the details, day-to-day details of the life of the mountain men were simply the wildest and craziest group of people in American history by far. And the details of their life, how they, so many of them were killed, died, were killed by natives or grizzly bears. But he survived. It's such a, if you're interested in the early trappers of the Rocky Mountains, this is possibly the best account by an eyewitness, the Journal of a Trapper.
Okay, and are you going to speak for Herbert also?
Oh, okay, yes. Herbert Winberger called me up, which he doesn't do very often. And he said, I'm just in the middle of this amazing book. It's called The Fall of Dynasties, Fall of the Dynasties in 1980. As a result of World War I, 4 great empires collapsed. And Herbert was saying that this, of course, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Ottoman Turkish Empire all collapsed. He said it's the most interesting account of the huge shift from that was a shift from the old world Europe to a new world Europe. He said it's a fascinating, filled with fascinating details.
And I think it would include the way the Middle East was carved up into the present borders that we're fighting over now.
That's right. The fact that the British carved up Iraq into, it should have been 3 separate nationalities. Yeah, and so the borders carved up by the French and the British is an important part of the story. Thank you, Walt.
There's an old BBC TV series documentary, The Fall of the Eagles, on the same thing, that's available for streaming, and really is fascinating.
All right.
Thank you, Kathy.
So Emmett, you're not here, are you? Emmett Kincaid had sent me the information on this book, and he's come across a pretty new trilogy on the war in the Pacific in part of World War II, and volume 1 came out in 2011 or 12, I think it was, and volume 2, which is the one he's recommending, came out in 2016, and then the latest one is more recent than that. And he just says that they're very readable, and he thinks if you read volume 2, which he recommends here, that you're going to want to read volume 1 and 3 also. So that's what he had to say about this book. So John Hawley, are you here today?
John was here, but I think he signed off. Calling John.
Okay, do you want to say anything about this book?
Yeah, I'll say one thing about it. The Conquest of Nature, it's how the Germans and their engineering genius totally re-engineered several rivers in Germany, and most notably the Rhine River. They've channelized the Rhine, so it's almost a totally different river from what it was previously, and then the effects of that. That's the short version. Thank you.
The other thing I'll say about this, Kathleen and I were discussing the other day how do our candidate books fit into the class that we've just completed, and this would seem to be one that fits pretty well into the history of Germany. Okay, I think we're on to Kathy Ehrenberg.
I first wanted to say that to let Diana know that I did avoid the forum this week, and thank you for the warning. And then for Bill's book on A Pilgrimage to Eternity by Timothy Egan, a good companion book for that is The Sign of the Cross, Travels Through Catholic Europe by Colm Toibin, which I would also really recommend. So my books. The Richest Man Who Ever Lived, which is the life and times of Jacob Fruger. It is a fascinating history of, it has enormous scope, and it's a fascinating history of Renaissance Germany. It starts off with a business trip that Jacob is making as a teenager to Venice, and working on his family's textile business. And it ties in very well to the class, and it's readily available in paperback. The next one is Orwell's Roses by Rebecca Solnit. Many of you might be familiar with her. She's a philosopher out of California. She's writing now for The Guardian. She's an excellent essayist, and her travel and geography books are just a delight to read. And she's taken a fascinating twist on our look at Orwell's interest in nature and focuses on the roses that he grew. It should be available in paperback by the time we're ready to read it. And then my third book was Letters to Commando. And one reason, it's this very small book by Edmund de Waal. And we may have read The Hare with Amber Eyes, which was his earlier book that got a lot of attention. This is the story of a French Jewish family who its art collection is now present in a small museum in Paris. The reason I suggested it was that it ties in with the class in that these families were, many of them were from the German or Austrian Empire and had resettled in France in an attempt to assimilate into another a safer culture, or so they thought. The reason I recommended this book, another reason I recommended this book was it's in the form of letters that fictionalized letters that Edmund de Waal has written to this dead Jewish art collector in businessmen. It's the, I recommended it for the same reason I might want to recommend a graphic novel or graphic history, just to take a look at another literary form. And I mean, it's, again, a good read. And then the last thing I wanted to say was, Belle, if you were interested in the red dye, the red color, there is another book out called Chromophilia, The Story of Color and Art by Stella Paul. And it looks at the history of all the early colors in Western art. And the book itself is so beautiful. It would be fun if you would coax the library to carry it. But anyway.
And what's the title of that book?
Yes.
Chromophilia.
Oh, say it again.
Chromophilia. So Chromaphilia by Stella Paul. It's a translation. She's a French writer, and it's a translation, but it's the history of color and art. And as I said, the book is just stunningly beautiful and also fascinating.
All right, thank you very much. The last three are from Christina and Van, and I will say before turning the floor over to them, The Big Burn we read in the book club a few years ago, so I think we will skip that, but I wanted to include it on the list because you had recommended it. So maybe you can go ahead and talk about the other two.
Oh, hi. Oh, we're not on, honey.
No. Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. All righty. Hi, everyone. Well, I have, I don't see me on video. I've suggested this book in the past, and it's a real heavy lift to try to talk you into a book that covers 350 years of history about math, but it's worth it. This was actually based on a PBS Nova special called The Proof, and it is fascinating. And that seems like an oxymoron when it comes to math, but this is a rip-roaring book. And as the back cover says, an astonishingly entertaining story. I read it about 20 years ago, and it claims on the back cover that it'll change your view about mathematics. And it really does. It's about 350 years of some of the best mathematicians in the world trying to solve a seemingly simple theorem. And they couldn't do it. And this story involves duels and suicides and a lot of math, and it's just a fun read. So I'm going to recommend it again, and I think it would be particularly fun for this book club because I, for one, would love to hear what Emmett has to say about it. I know he's a fan of the book too. So anyway, that I'm going to give a last dig for Fermat's Enigma. Sorry about the big burn. That looks like a good read. And then on to Bruna Shelley's Dome, how a Renaissance genius reinvented architecture. I haven't read this book, but it looks really fun. It's there was a competition in 1418 in Florence. They were trying to figure out how to build what would be the largest dome in the world, and nobody knew how to do it. And this guy who was a clockmaker somehow won the contest and went on to basically invent architecture. And so, I mean, it seems like a fun read to me.
I have to add something to Christina's book, the Brunelleschi's Dome. I have read it, and it is absolutely fascinating as a glimpse into some of the genius artists, sculptors, architects of the Renaissance in Florence, in Italy. Brunelleschi takes an impossible assignment to build a dome. He builds the first dome in 1,000 years since the Roman Empire. And the challenge is to he figures out a way to start the dome up about 200 feet in the air with oxen turning a wheel down on the ground that turns the wheel up in the air on the platform of the architect. Anyway, it's an absolutely fascinating account of Renaissance architecture and the revival of domed buildings. Thank you, Christina.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our list of books. Ariana, thank you so much for rescuing us with your screen share.
I'm going to stop recording right now.
During the pandemic, I taught full-time on